And Mr. Speaker, I'm sure throughout the day we are going to hear more about what the Minister of Defence did and didn't do. But what I would like to focus my remarks on at this point is what happened in the Prime Minister's office, the highest office of this land, and who should be held accountable for covering up those serious allegations. Now, Mr. Speaker, we are being told to believe that the Prime Minister didn't know. He has told Canadians, he's told the media, he has told this House that he didn't know about the allegations until just recently, when all of us learned about them just a few months ago. We are told through testimony that the Prime Minister's chief advisor knew, as well as his chief of staff, Katie Telford, but apparently they didn't tell him. They withheld this important information from the Prime Minister. That's what we are being told that we should believe. Now, for context, and this is important, Madam Speaker, let's remember that in March 2018, the Prime Minister and his office would have known that the evidence of him inappropriately groping a woman in 2000 was going to be brought to light. I personally recall the spring of 2018. It was one of the worst kept secrets in Ottawa that there was an article circulating written by a young reporter detailing her very unpleasant experience with the Prime Minister when he was 28 in the Kokanee. If so many of us knew about this article, the Prime Minister and his office would have had to have known. And he must have known that at some point it was going to be made public and he was going to be asked about it. And in that context, it's important to consider what the Prime Minister could have reasonably been thinking, what his state of mind could have been. He could have been thinking, if I fire General Vance for allegations of sexual misconduct, I am going to have to hold myself to the same standard when the evidence of my more egregious conduct comes forward. I'm sure, Madam Speaker, that the Prime Minister would have been faced with a very serious personal choice had he known about the sexual allegations against General Vance, a choice of either dismissing the Chief of the Defence for what he had done or ignoring the allegations, thus protecting himself. And as we saw when the Prime Minister was confronted with the groping incidents, he skated around it by saying some women experience things differently. And he gave himself a pass on his conduct, which I believe, in and of itself shows how far away the Prime Minister is from being a feminist. It's classic misogynist behavior. Blame and dismiss the woman. But looking back now, it all makes sense as to why the Prime Minister would have known about Vance, but covered up the allegations. Now, in that same context, Madam Speaker, let's follow the Prime Minister's assertion that he didn't know, that everyone around him knew, but he was kept in the dark, okay? Let's pretend that's reasonable, which I personally do not see as believable. That would mean the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, knew, and she didn't tell him. It means that Katie Telford knew of these allegations, and yet she allowed the Prime Minister to go ahead between the course of 2018 and 2020 and not only let him praise General Vance publicly for his good work on Operation Honor, but also make him the longest serving Chief of the Defence Staff and give him a $50,000 raise. Now, to me, Madam Speaker, that just doesn't seem believable that a Chief of Staff, a competent Chief of Staff, would allow her boss, the Prime Minister of this country, to put himself in such a vulnerable position and set himself up to be so badly embarrassed, discredited, and disbelieved. If it was true, and I was the Prime Minister, I would say, with friends like Katie Telford, who needs enemies? I would be furious with her, but I know the Prime Minister doesn't seem too furious, does he?
I'm just going to hold the clock for a minute. There seems to be a microphone on. I just want to remind members to make sure that their mics are off because it does interfere with the House affairs right now. The honourable member for the Honourable Deputy House Leader.
Deputy Leader.
Deputy Leader, sorry.
Thank you. Now, Madam Speaker, something about this whole story that's being told just doesn't ring true, but it's indeed what the Prime Minister is saying. So we're going to call him to act on it. Because in the Prime Minister's own words, if you know about a sexual allegation, this is what he said, if you are a person in authority, you have a duty to act. So we're calling on the Prime Minister to act, and act on the fact that apparently Katie Telford knew but didn't act. Now, on the other hand, if the Prime Minister knew and he's not admitting it, he needs to man up as soon as possible. And he needs to admit that he knew, but he didn't want to act on it. Why? Because he was protecting himself. Now, what we're seeing actually is a pattern with this Prime Minister. We saw it with the SNC-Lavalin affair, where he denied to the country that he even knew there had been political interference. Then he denied again, and he said, no, he didn't interfere. Then it became clear when we actually heard the voice recording that there had been political interference. And similarly, as in the Vance cover-up, the SNC interference was for the Prime Minister's benefit because he was worried about votes. And you know what? At the end of the whole horrid SNC-Lavalin incident, two very smart and capable women were ousted. The honourable member from Vancouver-Granville and Jane Philpott, the former health minister. And the Prime Minister came out smelling like a rose, at least in his own mind. I just hope today we're not seeing the same thing, whereby the Prime Minister, in an attempt to protect himself at all costs, has not only failed to protect our women in the military, but in the end, another competent woman, Katie Telford, will pay for his mistake, even with a tarred reputation, because make no mistake, her reputation is tarred. Now, don't get me wrong. If she covered it up, she deserves to be fired. But if she didn't cover it up and he's not telling the truth, he needs to stand up, tell the truth, own up to what he's done. And for once, maybe once in his lifetime, but for sure once in his career as Prime Minister, take responsibility for his mistruths, for his conduct, and for his cover-up. Madam Speaker, Winston Churchill said, I no longer listen to what people say, I just watch what they do. Behavior never lies, never lies. And I believe that's where we are with this Prime Minister and his claims to be a feminist. His actions show he is not a feminist. Canadian women are watching his behavior, as are our women and men in uniform. The women in his own party, including those who work for him, have seen his behavior. And if they haven't seen it, they need to take a hard look. Conservatives have certainly seen his behavior.
The honourable member's time is up for debate, so she'll be able to continue during questions and comments. Questions et commentaires.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Thérèse-Blainville. Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is very serious. This situation is very regrettable. Action must be taken to remedy this situation. However, though, the Conservative motion and your speech today should not should make sure that that it must be recognized that neither the Conservatives nor the Liberals did anything when they were in power when he was appointed Chief of the Defence Staff. So I think that you are perhaps not testifying in good faith. So what do you have to say to respond to that? Thank you. I would like to remind the member that she must address her remarks directly through the speaker and not directly to the member in question.
Leader for the official opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague for her question. And I would like to just correct something. The Liberals have been doing trying to deflect from what they have done in this current situation, and they've been trying to do that by blaming others. The fact is, it was the Conservative government that actually initiated the Deschamps report, and when rumors around General Vance became even heard about, Conservatives acted on them. Very different than the current government, when they were given evidence, very concrete evidence from the Ombudsman. The Minister of Defence pushed them away, covered them up for over 3 years, and instead gave General Vance a raise, a promotion, and praised him. This is, I think, very telling, that, and the fact that they're not owning up to it. What we're saying today is there can be no fix for this terrible problem, this terrible situation, until the Prime Minister owns up to the cover-up that he's participated in.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And, yesterday I listened very closely to the government House Leader as he addressed the issue at great length. And I'm wondering, based in terms of what I heard from the government House Leader, if the opposition member has any regrets with respect to things that she put on the record that might have actually misled Canadians on this issue.
The Honourable Deputy Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, my biggest recollection yesterday from the government House Leader was him throwing the F-bomb into the House of Commons. But other than that, I would think he would have a regret about that. I'll tell you what I think the only regrets here should be with this government, this so-called feminist prime minister who time after time after time throws strong and capable women under the bus. We've seen it with the honourable member from Vancouver Granville. We've seen it with Jane Philpott. You can ask many women in the Liberal caucus, and we're seeing it currently with the Prime Minister saying, Katie Telford knew, but nobody told me about these sexual misconduct allegations. It's just not believable, but you know what? We're calling his bluff. And if indeed Telford didn't tell him, then fire her. But if she did tell him, he needs to own up to it. He needs to take responsibility, and he needs to, for once in his career as Prime Minister, do the right thing for the men and women of the country and for the military, and not to protect himself.
Time for a brief question. The Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Speaker, the issues of sexual allegations that are in the military are deeply concerning. What I find really shocking today is that the Conservatives are trying to use this to exploit this issue. It is completely not acceptable that they're bringing into Parliament to decide who gets fired and who doesn't. That's something that is not what Parliament should be doing, and I think this is a very disturbing issue, and I think that the Conservatives are taking this issue and exploiting it just for their own political benefit, not for the men and women in uniform.
The Honourable Deputy Leader of the Official Opposition, a brief answer, please.
Well, I would completely disagree. What the NDP are mostly concerned about is propping up the Liberals at every chance they get. And it's sad to see the NDP abandoning the men and women in uniform instead of showing some courage, taking a stand, and calling the Prime Minister, his office, the Minister of Defence to account for what they're doing. But I'm not surprised. The NDP have lost all relevance, and they continue to do so today.
Resuming debate. The Honourable Member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank the Deputy Leader for her great opening comments and for bringing forward today's motion. And we are calling the Prime Minister's bluff today and what he knew and what he didn't do. But first, I just want to tell those that serve our country in uniform that it's very clear that there's a huge problem in the Department of National Defence, the Canadian Armed Forces, with this ongoing and serious problem of sexual misconduct. And we ask a lot of you in uniform that you go out and serve in the Canadian Armed Forces every day, and you have taken the oath to protect each and every one of us. And it is inherent upon us as members of Parliament to do our best to ensure that you have a safe work environment. And that means that you should not be subjected to sexual harassment in the workplace. When our sons and daughters, our sisters and brothers, our mothers and fathers serve this nation, they should never be subjected to sexual harassment. And this unsafe culture must change. And that's why our Conservative Party suggested by our leader over 2 months ago an action plan that the government could take today and implement and get real results. As our leader said, we would order a service-wide independent investigation into sexual misconduct in the military. That would be from top to bottom. During that investigation, all general and flag officers' promotions and salaries during the investigation will be frozen, so that that we can weed out any of the problems and then bring forward the proper promotions. We would introduce policies to ensure that future complaints of sexual misconduct are made to truly an external independent body that's completely outside of the chain of command. And to change the culture and to ensure that we have a true egalitarian society within the Canadian Armed Forces, we would bring forward policies to make greater representation of women and other underrepresented Canadians amongst the top ranks of the Canadian Armed Forces in all the services, Air Force, Army, and Navy. And we have to ensure that the women and men who serve our country can do it with honor and without compromise. And that all starts by making sure we have a safe environment and having women at the command table.